Hello, my name is Dr. Matt Metter, and I wanted to do something a little different in terms of a history lesson. Today is the 21st of August, 2026, and it just so happens to be an important anniversary. 162 years ago, on August the 21st, 1864, General Forrest made a raid into the city of Memphis. This presentation, essentially a reconstruction of that particular battle, not one battlefield, but two battlefields in one raid, if you will. This reconstruction separates the entire Memphis garrison from the men that were actually engaged and distinguishes Forrest's whole command from the detachment that actually entered downtown. Some of you may be wondering why Forrest raided Memphis. There was no intention by Forrest to raid Memphis to capture or hold the city. The city was too strongly fortified, and its overall garrison was too large for his cavalry force. Instead, he designed the August 21st, 1864 operation as a rapid raid intended to achieve three connected objectives. First, relieve pressure in northern Mississippi as Major General A.J. Smith's federal column was operating against Forrest's command in northern Mississippi. Forrest's raid into Memphis, there was a hope that a sudden threat to Memphis would compel Union commanders to actually recall those troops for the city's defense. This was the raid's most important strategic purpose, and for the most part, it largely succeeded. The attack actually demonstrated that Memphis remained vulnerable, and it helped redirect federal attention northward. Additionally, Forrest wanted to capture Union leadership. His attempt was to seize three generals: General Washburn, the Southern Regional Commander; General Hurlbut, Washburn's prominent predecessor; and last, Ralph P. Buckland, who was the commander of the District of Memphis. Their capture could have disrupted federal command while providing valuable prisoners for exchange, and ultimately humiliating federal authorities. It was essentially an attempted and decapitation strike. Was the release of Confederate prisoners. One downtown detachment, again, detachment, we're going to talk about numbers here in a little bit, but one downtown detachment moved toward Irving Block Prison, where Confederate soldiers and sympathizers were actually confined. Federal resistance prevented the raiders from reaching and releasing the prisoners. The raid into Memphis was a psychological piece as well. Forrest wanted to create disruption and demonstrate his reach, the psychological aspect of things. He wanted to prove that federal occupation did not make Memphis secure. A Confederate force penetrating the city, that just demonstrated that with the approach of, the approaching senior officers' bedrooms and withdrawing successful withdrawing successfully would damage federal confidence and, of course, strengthen Forrest's reputation. Now, the attack on Irving Block, or the freeing of inmates at Irving Block, obviously the acquisition of prisoners, horses, and supplies, that is of a physical nature. But that was also secondary to the actual strategic mission. They needed cavalry needed fresh horses, useful supplies, and of course, as a result of that raid, the raiders captured federal personnel and obtained mounts during the operation. The overall assessment, as we get into this, the overall assessment of the raid in general, it failed to capture the generals, and it failed to release the Irving Block prisoners. However, it nevertheless achieved the broader operational effect. In the OR, one can read that it's demonstrated that Forrest's actions actually brought to bear that it diverted federal attention. It disrupted Memphis, and it embarrassed a federal command. It also demonstrated that Forrest could strike behind federal lines. Any strong presentation formulation would consist that Forrest raided Memphis not to capture it, but to protect his command in Mississippi by creating a crisis. That crisis was behind federal lines. The generals and prisoners were immediate targets, forcing the Federals to look north instead of pursuing him south as the larger purpose. Now, the OR fixes 3 anchors on time. Many of you might be time hounds, much like me. I like my times, I like my dates, things of that nature, as I'm researching this love of Civil War history. 3 a.m., 5 a.m., and 9 a.m. About a 6-hour time frame that this battle actually occurred. The reports are not perfectly synchronized. Let's just be honest about it. Washburn places Forrest at the picket, that southernmost picket, on the Hernando Road. You're going to see a map here in a moment, but just visualize this as we talk about just the times, okay? You'll see over here on that left side of the screen, that's an OR record. That was actually from Lieutenant Colonel Thurston, okay? Basically serving as the IG. Was not a fan of Washburn, and that was clearly indicated in some of his writing. But at 3 a.m., it places Forrest at the picket line. Thurston, from his report here, places the entry of about 400 men at around 5 a.m. General Washburn states that fighting outside continued until about 9 a.m. So there are conflicting reports around this. So the premise of this particular presentation is that we're using the official record, and the individuals in the compiled from the official record are Washburn and Buckland, Thurston, so on and so forth. Now, one of the things that you may be scratching your head on is that you might have seen the time frame of around 4 a.m. thrown out there. For all intents and purposes of this anniversary presentation, we're going with 3 a.m. as it relates to what's in the OR. You can always go check out the OR yourself. There's going to be more source material towards the end of the presentation. So let's talk about the 3 federal reports and how they frame our surviving OR narrative. So the attack on Memphis report section contains 3 reports. One from General Washburn, Colonel Thurston, and of course General Buckland. Now, there are no signed forced after action report. It doesn't appear in that published section. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, it just doesn't appear there. Therefore, the presentation attributes specific figures to their authors and treats force exact assignments. His assignments, his routes, okay, and any intentions cautiously unless independently corroborated. What does all that mean? Unless I've seen it in the OR or found a document, breadcrumb, trail, it's not going to be put in here until it's validated. Okay? We like our sources. We like our truthfulness, right? As a historian, you don't want to put out false information. We lead with integrity. You guys are all experts. You know how this cookie crumbles, right? Use the numbered sequence. Looking at the marks over here, having to deal with Buckland's rally, go to detail point 4. We've got several sources, particularly Washburn. Washburn mentions that there were over 2,000 forest troops. And that may be the case. But we also have official record that says that only 400 actually made a dash to the city. And of that 400, each were split into two assignments. One assignment was 200 men, another assignment was 200 men. When we get into the map here in a moment, you'll see how that division or that division actually works. So, this map makes the analytical point that the raid was not a single downtown melee. It was actually comprised of 2 battlefields. 1 mission, 2 battlefields. It comprised of a southern fight along Hernando Road, and then a fast downtown penetration several miles further north. As you look at this particular map, you'll see point 1 was a picket line. If you want to look at distance from that picket line into the downtown area of Memphis, that's a 3 to 4 mile span. Okay? And that map is actually based on the approximation because the OR's appended map was reported not found. And the picket location has had to be reconstructed. Now, let's talk about the generals that were involved in the raid. We'll talk about the federal side. You had Major General Cad C. Washburn. He was the senior federal commander at Memphis, commanding the District of West Tennessee as a Tennessee command structure. Responsibilities included directing operations against forests in northern Mississippi. This was Forrest's most valuable target. When we get into the maps here, Forrest would actually send a Confederate detachment directly to Washburn's now Union Street residence, whereby Washburn would actually escape to Fort Pickering which was about half a mile away. While the Confederates did not capture Washburn, the raiders actually captured his uniform, horse, and personal effects. And of course, his disappearance from immediate command contributed to the confused Federal response. Major General Hurlbut was Washburn's prominent predecessor in the regional command, and he was the former commander of the 16th Corps. He would remain an important, highly recognizable Union general associated with federal control of Memphis and operations against Forrest. Forrest Command, once they entered the city, they searched the Gayoso house, where they expected to find him and other senior officers. General Hurlbut was apparently lodging elsewhere and actually escaped capture. His capture would still have been politically and psychologically valuable, even though he was no longer an active Memphis commander. Brigadier General Ralph P. Buckland was the actual commander of the Memphis district of Memphis, and therefore responsible for the city's immediate defense and garrison. Buckland was both the target and the officer who produced the most effective federal reaction. Awakened by the firing, he reached the barracks at 3rd and Jefferson, gathered approximately 150 officers and men, ordered the alarm gun fired, and helped to organize a counterattack. The Tennessee Historical Commission marker pieces Lieutenant Sales. This is T.S. Sales. All right, T. Sanders Sales. 2 guns. This is Confederate guns. About 700 yards southwest of the State Female College. If you're looking at this map, you'll notice that there are distances at the bottom. Using the mapped historic sites, the college to 3rd and Jefferson leg is approximately 2 to 2.5 miles. That's what you see presented on this map here is roughly, as you're looking at it, 2 to 2.5 miles to insert Forrest Command into the downtown area from where Sales' position was. Now, going back to what Washburn had indicated, about 2,500, roughly 2,500 of Forrest cavalry. Sure, the largest chunk of command actually stayed back in the Hernando, or on the Hernando Road area, in to the general area where the State Female College was. 400 are actually documented as making the dash into downtown. So before daylight, roughly 3 a.m., looking at the map here, it's very interesting. It's kind of surreal that we're talking about this 162 years later. But just looking at this map here, this creates an aspect of the first battlefield, if you will. The 137th Illinois picket line is located at that very bottom piece. This is indicated as number 1. Before daylight, Buckland was awakened by warnings and heard firing in several directions. The direct OR wording is before it was fairly light. At about 5 a.m., Forrest's advance actually entered into Memphis by way of the Hernando Road after breaking through, notice here, the 137th Illinois Pickets. The time mentioned was explicit in Thurston's report. Shortly after 5 a.m., the raiders divided into two principal parties and moved toward Union Street and the Gayoso House. Also coming from the Thurston report, at approximately 5 to 5:15 a.m., Buckland reached 3rd and Jefferson. Remember from the previous statement that Buckland was largely responsible for the reaction of the federal force because Washburn had vacated from his quarters, after Forrest's detachment had gone in to attempt to capture him. He ran. You'll see a map of that here in a moment. But ran from his quarters and made his way about half a mile down into Fort Pickering. Okay. Now at the time, I don't think we've discussed this up until this point, but at the time, Memphis had about a garrison of 6,000 men. Now, they may have been all over. They may have been located at pickets. Militia may have gone somewhere. They have sent units out. We already know that General A.J. Smith was very, very active in North Mississippi. So where that garrison was, it wasn't the full force. Because if you go back, and as I've mentioned several times, up until this point, Buckland only rallied about 150 men from the 3rd and Jefferson rally point. That's not to say that the garrison, there weren't men there, but to say that 6,000 federal troops were responsible for jumping into action against Forrest's raid into Memphis on August 21st, 1864. All 6,000, it's not there. Now, Buckland, again, 5 to 5:15, Buckland would reach 3rd and Jefferson. Federal soldiers began assembling. And of course, when you move into our next slide, you'll see that reconstructed from the Buckland sequence, as I like to call it. Not an explicit clock time, per se. And of course, between 5:10 and 5:20 a.m., the alarm gun was actually fired. Bell gathered elements of the 8th Iowa and the 113th Illinois detachment. And you'll see that in our next visual as well. This is what you see on screen now is largely devoted towards the first battlefield, if you will. As they would leave the downtown area, we're just going to talk about this now since we've got it on the screen. As they would leave the downtown area, they would come. The Confederate troops would actually come back through via the Hernando Road area, what you see on screen here. It should be noted as this right here. There is nothing documenting that Lieutenant Sale's guns ever pointed in the direction of downtown Memphis. As a matter of fact, the only information that we currently have available, keep in mind, Forrest did not have an after-action report that made it into the OR. However, what we do know is that with strong reconstructing of the OR, we do know that Sales had 2 guns, and they were roughly about 700 yards southwest, pointing northeast towards the State Female College. There's no documentation that is indicative that at any point in time he pointed those guns towards downtown in support of the 400 troops that made the downtown dash. So using the map and of course the historic sites, something significant, something interesting along the way. Again, as I mentioned, Sale's 2 Confederate guns actually fired northeast at Federals occupying the State Female College. and that was approximately 700 yards away from where they were. Today, there is a Tennessee Historical Society marker that denotes where that artillery placement was on that first battlefield. And according to that marker, the firing actually stopped after Sale learned that women and children were inside the female college. If you want to study more about that, the state female college stood at 908 East McLemore. And of course, more information can be found at the University of Memphis Special Collections in that regard. So if you recall, this being the southern battlefield, if you will, 400 troops were taken from that point 1, where the 137th Illinois Picket was located, up until the 3rd and Jefferson rally point is roughly between 3 and 4 miles. But from Sale's position, the female college location, that's roughly 2 to 2.5 miles, if you would. Okay. Again, there's nothing that you see on screen that's to scale. This is, having lived in the Memphis area all of my life and having driven that location the thousands of times, just trying to get an idea of what a unit would, distance-wise, endure. And it's quite a distance that's there. Sale's artillery, back to it. Sale's artillery actually apparently would remain oriented to the College and Hernando Road sector. That's that circle that you see on the screen here. That's the Hernando Road sector. Again, there's no indication that Sales turned his guns to the north. But as the Confederates withdrew, the downtown troopers, as they moved south and passed back through, they would rejoin whatever Confederate body was there in the Hernando Road action. And to date, I have found no OR account describing Confederate or Federal artillery firing into downtown Memphis. The reports describe only mounted movement, pistol and musketry fire. That's the only information that we've got there. It depicts the headquarters raids, prisoner objectives, and of course the Federal counterattack. The artillery evidence belongs solely confined to that southern battlefield, if you will. Okay, battlefield number 1. I mentioned the Tennessee Historical Commission, or the Historical Society. It's actually the commission. I think I mentioned the society. I apologize. But it's the Tennessee Historical Commission that has a sign that's out there. Looking at this particular map, this is the second battlefield, if you will. So those 400 raiders would actually enter into the downtown area. Detachments of those men, 200 went to certain sites, and 200 other men went to another site. Again, as far as attempting to capture the generals, Hurlbut as well as Washburn had zero effect. One wasn't there, and one actually escaped and made his way to Fort Pickering. As far as, liberating Irvin Block Prison, that also was not successful. The raid on the Gayoso house, again, something So as you see over here, this is downtown aspect of things. Now, we've talked about Lieutenant Sale's guns. There were 6 guns from the Federal side as they drew south. Okay, so as they were moving back towards the south, you had Company G of the 2nd Missouri Artillery and a section of the 7th Wisconsin Battery that was available in the southern fight. We talked about Washburn's escape. Notice location A. Okay, location A is where Washburn was. In present-day Memphis, we have Washburn's escape alley down through there. And of course, that little line that's over here, as you can see, the line is right over here to indicate that this was the route that he took. The serrated line, as you can see right over here, that is present-day Interstate 55. So just to orient yourself with the driving in Memphis today. Thurston would actually write that Fort Pickering was a full 1/2 mile from his house. And of course, the route shown was therefore constructed in the southwest corridor. Okay? It's not a documented turn-by-turn path. However, the fort itself was an extensive installation along the southern Mississippi bluff. It extended for more than a mile along the Mississippi River, and of course, it extended from the river to the east by 1/3 of a mile. So it was a very, very big establishment. Current numbers. Washburn's noon dispatch actually called the attackers at about 2,500 cavalry. His narrative says about 1/3 of Forrest's command entered the city itself. Again, roughly 400. Thurston would actually give the narrower estimate of about 400 and divided that into 2 squads of about 200 figures each. As far as the Memphis garrison itself, you looked at 6,000 troopers, of which only 400 Buckland would be able to ultimately rally as a result of the action that's there. The number of known federal troops that were involved in the engagement with Forrest directly remains unknown. The table here lists only formations explicitly placed by Washburn, Buckland, and Thurston. Colonel David Moore of the 21st Missouri temporarily commanded the Hernando Road Force, but his regiment was not present. The 39th and 41st Wisconsin are named in Washburn's rally list. Buckland specifically identifies the 40th Wisconsin arriving at Hernando Road. Lieutenant Colonel Thurston, William H. Thurston, was a Union staff officer. He served as an Assistant Inspector General of the 16th Army Corps, not a commander of troops during Forrest's raid. Thurston's job was to examine military conditions overall and report on matters such as discipline and readiness, conduct of officers, security failures, accuracy of reports, losses, captures, and abandoned property. Also handled matters requiring investigation by higher command. His August 24th report was therefore effectively an after-action assessment of the Memphis raid. Why his report actually matters is that Thurston actually supplies several important details. One, about the 400 Confederates entering Memphis at around 5 a.m. 2, mentions how they divided into roughly 200 200-man squads. 1 squad, 2 squad, 200 men each. One group surrounded the Gayoso house. The other moved against Washburn's Union Street residence. And of course, as mentioned earlier, Washburn would escape that. Colonel Starr was actually wounded, and federal officers and soldiers were captured. Memphis experienced another panic
on August 23rd based on a rumor or a false report that Forrest had returned. Thurston was highly critical of Washburn overall. I mentioned that a little earlier. He believed that Washburn could have gone to the nearby Provost Guard headquarters rather than Fort Pickering. He also criticized the federal command climate and called the August 23rd panic the most disgraceful affair he had ever witnessed. However, Thurston specifically defended Buckland, stating that no blame can be attached to Brigadier General Buckland that I can hear of. As Thurston was gathering information after the event, his report repeatedly uses phrases such as, "so far as I can learn," "reports conflict," and "as I have no access to the official reports." These phrases were consistent. Therefore, Thurston should be presented as a Union inspector conducting an immediate post-raid inquiry, not necessarily an eyewitness to every incident. His report is exceptionally valuable for timing, command criticism, and the estimate of 400 downtown raiders, but it should be checked against Washburn's and Buckland's first-hand accounts, and those are actually available as well. As mentioned, the downtown objectives appear in Washburn's report. Buckland's report supplies the federal rally and counterattack sequence. No precise clock time is given for each objective. It's just not there. Buckland reports 6 artillery pieces, as mentioned a little earlier, on Hernando Road, firing about 30 rounds each. He identifies Company G, 2nd Missouri Artillery, as mentioned, we mentioned on a couple of slides ago, and a section of the 7th Wisconsin Battery. Washburn states that the outside fight continued until about 9 a.m., and at that time, the entire Confederate force then moved off and on south of on the Hernando Road. Washburn reports total federal losses as 1 officer and 14 enlisted killed, 6 officers and 59 enlisted wounded, 4 officers captured, and 112 enlisted missing, for a total of 196. He reports that 22 Confederates were killed, about 15 badly wounded and were left on the field, and of course 25 prisoners were captured. Categories and reporting standards will obviously differ, so the Confederate figures should not be summed as a definitive total. Closing synthesis, or OR, supports a minimum federal rally figure, not a total engaged strength. It also separates the city detachment from Forrest's whole command and shows that shows the most sustained combat. I like to call this a raid of 2 battlefields. We had that southern battlefield. Keep in mind the Hernando Road, the initial picket attack right there with the 137th Illinois, having moved forward against the 7th Wisconsin and that Missouri Battery. And then, of course, the setting up of Sales Artillery firing into the State Female College. And then, of course, the detachment of the 400 men that raided into the Memphis, or downtown Memphis proper. This presentation is grounded in the official records, reports of Washburn, Thurston, and Buckland. The missing appended map requires caution about the exact route geometry. The maps that were depicted in this particular presentation for the 164th anniversary were generated with artificial intelligence based off of OR reporting. If you have any further questions about the raid into Memphis, the 2 battlefields that occur that you've seen in the maps, please don't hesitate. Reach out to Matt at metherbydesign.com. That's MATT at METHERBYDESIGN.com. That's metherbydesign.com. Thank you all very much.